Again in studio, this time about how difficult life someone is. Sometimes life is not what we think, and life is not what humans plan. Some people are more greedy in life and they want more and more and more of today, and they want more of emotion every moment in their life. But sometimes you must just realize that life is sometimes also sad, especially if there is a lot of crisis in world or in town you're living in. To understand thousands of cities around the world, you'll also understand how much poverty is there. Sometimes in life there is a lot of poverty because people do not understand simple outdoor. Millions of books made are nothing special. Those are not the currency, but are something much, much, much more simple than currency. They are the virtue actually shared, but also some sort of vision what life could be. To understand life, it's not easy, and it's also not easy to understand those German and French language. But if you know them a little bit, you'll also understand a little bit of life. Sometimes we use symbols to match different forms of patterns with different forms of philosophy and psychiatry. To understand psychiatry is not easy, but also to understand different forms of psychology when it's come to very, very difficult part of coding. To understand different forms of areas in this world together with different zone, and every zone have its own zone, and also different forms of store in every city, some store. To understand that life it's not easy, especially not for people that are in architecture, but also not for authors or for people that build simple patterns together with books. To understand difference of psychology together with characters, it's also not easy. To understand the behavior that famous people have, sometimes you are going to realize that they are not better than you. If you want to become more of yourself and much less of those that are very, very known or even famous, you should actually make simple form of psychiatry together with neurobiological psychiatry, but also to understand different forms of manufacturing, but also building better cosmetics. To understand psychologists, you must be author. In other case that's not possible. But of course, usually scientists are too social and psychiatrists are sometimes unlogical, not all, but a lot of them they are. To understand different forms of boundaries in the United States of America, but also different forms of boundaries in Europe, it's not easy. Everyone is limited in this life. Humans are limited with their currency, but they are also limited with what they really know. Because if we do not know something, it's very hard to build better life. But sometimes it's better not to know. And also, the knowledge we have, that's some sort of currency. If human decide to share some knowledge, you shared some currency to this world without spending anything. To understand different forms of psychological property and knowledge, you can understand that knowledge actually is your property that you are going to share. But to understand social psychology, it's not easy because there are different forms of arousal and also erotics around different forms of psychology and psychologists. So social routine in this world is not easy, but also to understand different forms of simple functioning together with our brain. And my world family is not easy because my family in this world is very poor. Sometimes you must understand that there is difference between poor and rich, but also the development it's much different. In this world there is no evolution in culture unless there would be extra subject about science or extra subject about psychology. To understand those forms of intelligence, it's not easy unless you know extra, very smart book, but also printing process. The Canon have very, very good printers. Some are used and some are very, very exclusive. To understand that thousands of characters in my book actually experience the canon and the ways and motions together with the picture and what actually agents are. It's very, very difficult, but also to understand different forms of attentions that people actually pay for canon, or different forms of authors, how they appear to be some sort of an agent. Of course, there is also psychology that design Robert is superior meaning and represent all the authors in this world. No rap at all, but psychology become very, very symbolic with the picture of me. To understand different forms of psychology, it become very, very difficult to build different forms of groups and psychoanalysis in medicine sectors. Different forms of discipline appears in medicine, but also the Taoism funding for different topics in medicine. To understand social forms in this life, it's not easy, and humans should not spend too much time on social environments if you are a psychologist, especially a good one. To understand different forms of psychology theory and to understand to build better book. To understand mental health of owners in applications is very, very difficult, but also explained in book as extreme disbehavior. To understand different forms of motivations of doctors, it's not easy. But also the development of thousands of materials that people could build plums with, or even bones. To understand education might be only screaming or extremely, extremely sad once teachers want to teach too much. Sometimes also the Buddhism can actually perfect some areas in human life, especially when it comes to better brain and meditation. To understand biotin, but also different forms of life together with Vedic texts, it's not easy. It's also very important to build better psychology about life, but also the science of simple hairs. To understand different forms of British ideas is also not easy, especially if you also think about India. There are very, very different forms in British areas or also in India. It is almost like you would look in the United States of America and try to look the theory of those culture, especially in art hairs or art face or art of body. And then you would see the China and how much different there is with their simple Tai Chi, but also different profound functions that Chinese appear to believe what body could do. Of course, there is also the Yellow Emperor classics and some other aging topics. Those are extremely, extremely difficult. And sometime in life you could not think about anything, especially not in United States or in Europe, and that type of medicine. Sometimes the cure it's much more mysterious or more simple in life, and also how to heal different forms of cancers. The medicines sometimes try to see cancers as something extremely, extremely poisonous, but the Chinese see it as something without balance. So to build balance in life, it's not always easy. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to build better balance, but sometimes humans actually have some trouble. So they can understand that life it's not only building millions of dollars, but also the reproduction of the healthy cells. To understand that, of course, it's not easy. Sometimes it is very, very difficult to build better psychiatry in America, but also in Europe, all those brands and simple companies do not understand that sometimes it's better to trust simple Taoism, but also the classics and microcosmic orbits. To understand that type of currency is not easy, but also the theory of entire medicine in Europe, it is not easy to understand once you see how simple Taoism might be. To understand different forms of characters that appears in my book, it is also not simple because they are in 16th century, not anything more new at all. Also, to understand different forms of comité and different forms of very evil agents described in my book, it's not easy. But also to understand different forms of translations that appear in this world from my English. Of course, 90% of translations are even prohibited. But of course, you could not prohibit everything. Sometimes it's also important in life to understand that some alternatives are actually also important, but also to understand different forms of abstractions or how our partners can teach us few things about life or beauty. Beauty is not only look, but also a lot of health. Sometimes it's very important to understand that. And in life, you should not compare with other people or how they look. You should actually understand self and better purpose of self or better version to understand that bigger and bigger traditions and bigger humans might blame little people for everything, but that's not the real way. Sometimes it is very important to understand self, but also the origin of your philosophy. Your philosophy is going to widely build different forms of fashion that life appears to believe in. Sometimes it is very important to understand that perfection it's not only coding or only building more and more silver and more gold or building millions of dollars. That's right. Not actually earn that currency, but building it. Because in life, human must build something. To understand that most of social people want to work hard for currency, but you are not going to get any currency going to work. In life, only way to build millions of dollars is actually to trust Taoism and not too much yourself. Sometimes you must build currency. There are, of course, also different forms of items in life, but also millions of religions that author use in book. Of course, book can build different forms of ethics for social people, but also to understand there are also some higher meanings in Taoism and not only beauty and beauty of life for your partner. Sometimes the meanings are very, very difficult when it comes to day and when it comes to night, and you could never explain that to social humans. To understand different forms of traditions in life, it's not easy, but also to understand the Tao Te Ching, but also some forms of longevity. Of course, some people, or even doctors in medicine, might think that longevity is only exorcism or extreme devil, but some also related to heavens. Me in my books described that simple forms or traditions are not shamanic culture. They are only a fairy tale. And you are going to live in your life the fairy tale you believe in and not the fairy tale other people believe in. Sometimes it is important to live life as individual and not too much as a social group. Sometimes life is also a spontaneous form, and sometimes life is more like chaos. The chaos is very, very difficult because sometimes it's going to be biological and sometimes like some sort of very robotic partner that's going to execute everything you've seen actually in a book story, which of course is some sort of very, very strange forum if you are simple author that actually design your own partner. To understand different forms of crystallizations in life, it's also not easy because those theories actually build better and better solutions, not only for bones and plums and materials in your body, but also different forms of buildings around the world and some sort of better and better materials that do not only build the entire theory for the solid house human can own, or if you prefer a cheap flat. But if me admit to myself, some flats are also excellent and not cheap at all. With cheap, me do not means any currency. It means style. Sometimes it is very important to understand photocrystal forms and how much they cost. They do not cost any currency. They cost a lot of sometimes also shared forms in elegance. A lot of people think that multifunction is very important, but in life, sometimes it's better not to eat with two big spoons. Sometimes it's better to use a small fork. The symbols that appears in some of my live books, but also materials and cells are very, very difficult symbols. Those symbols might also include different medicine psychologies, the atmosphere factors, different forms of outer space, forms and beauty of different forms of face, but also superior safety in face design. To understand those forms together with orbits, it's not simple, but if you execute and build and live the administration of air in life and purity, that might also include the aeronautics and psychology about entire history. Sometimes also about who manufactured something or to build better safety, to build better laboratories, to build better defensive tactics, or to build better agency. Sometimes human only must build better simple life.